I always thought our life was perfect. Eduardo and I had everything we could ever wish for: a beautiful house, a stable income, and an unspoken understanding that tethered our hearts together. But as the years went by, the silence in our home began to echo louder. I wanted a child, a little one to complete our family and fill the empty spaces in our lives. It started as a gentle longing, an ache that settled in my heart whenever I saw mothers with their children. "We'll have our time," Eduardo would say, his hand warm on mine as we watched children play in the park. His confidence was comforting, and for a while, it was enough to ease my fears. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I turned to Eduardo, unable to keep my feelings bottled up any longer. "Eduardo, don't you think it's time we start trying for a baby?" My voice was soft, almost tentative, as if I feared his response. Eduardo sighed, his eyes meeting mine with that familiar calm reassurance. "Adelina, we've talked about this. It'll happen when it's meant to happen. We just need to be patient." "But what if it doesn't?" I pressed, my voice trembling slightly. "What if there's something wrong?" He pulled me closer, wrapping his arms around me. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Stressing about it won't help. Let's enjoy what we have now, okay?" I nodded, trying to absorb his calmness, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. As months turned into a year, my longing grew into an obsession. Every visit to friends with children, every family gathering, became a reminder of what we didn't have. I found myself drifting towards the baby section in stores, my fingers brushing over tiny clothes and toys. Eduardo noticed, of course, but he remained the steady rock in my turbulent sea of emotions. One night, after a particularly difficult day, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Eduardo, I want to see a doctor," I said as we lay in bed. "Just to make sure everything is okay, please." He turned to me, his expression a mix of concern and resignation. "If it'll ease your mind, Adelina, then we'll go. But promise me you won't let this consume you." "I promise," I whispered, though even then I knew it was a promise I might not be able to keep. The first doctor's appointment was a whirlwind of tests and consultations. Eduardo was by my side, holding my hand as we navigated the sterile corridors and clinical conversations. The initial results were inconclusive, leading to more tests and more appointments. Each visit became a beacon of hope and dread, a cycle of anticipation and disappointment. One evening, as we were having dinner, Eduardo reached across the table and took my hand. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. "I'm trying," I replied, forcing a smile. "But it's hard, Eduardo. I just want to know why it's not happening." He squeezed my hand, his eyes filled with love and concern. "We'll figure it out, Adelina. Together. Just remember, you're not alone in this." His words were a comfort, but as the weeks passed, the strain on our relationship became more apparent. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and dreams, turned to medical jargon and hushed arguments. Eduardo was patient, but I could see the weariness in his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged under the weight of my obsession. One night, after a particularly heated argument, Eduardo took a deep breath and said, "Adelina, we can't let this tear us apart. I love you and I want a family just as much as you do. But we have to find a way to live our lives without this constant cloud hanging over us." I looked at him, tears welling in my eyes. "I know, Eduardo. I know. I don't know how to let go." "We'll figure it out," he repeated, pulling me into a tight embrace, one step at a time. And so, we tried. But the seed of longing had taken root deep within me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The silence in our home grew louder, echoing through the empty rooms and our hearts. Our once perfect life was beginning to show cracks, and I feared that if we didn't find a way to fill the void, those cracks would only deepen, threatening to shatter everything we had built together. Eduardo's demeanor began to change. He still held me at night, but there was a distance in his eyes that hadn't been there before. I tried to ignore it, attributing it to the stress we were both under. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The visits to doctors and fertility specialists continued, but each appointment left us more disheartened. One evening, after yet another disappointing visit, Eduardo seemed unusually quiet during dinner. The clinking of our utensils against the plates was the only sound, amplifying the tension in the room. "Eduardo, is everything all right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine briefly before looking away. Just tired, Adelina. It's been a long day. Tired of what? I pressed, my frustration bubbling to the surface. Of me. Of us? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Of this endless cycle. I hate seeing you so unhappy, and I hate that I can't fix it. I reached out, placing my hand over his. We're in this together. We'll get through it. But as the weeks turned into months, Eduardo's absences became more frequent. He started working late, claiming that the office was demanding more of his time. I wanted to believe him, but the nagging doubt in my mind grew stronger. The distance between us was widening, and I felt powerless to bridge the gap. One evening, after another long day at work, Eduardo came home looking exhausted. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine but not really reading it. I watched him as he loosened his tie and collapsed into the armchair across from me. Long day? I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. He nodded, closing his eyes and leaning back. Yeah, you could say that. Eduardo, we need to talk, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I feel like we're drifting apart. He opened his eyes and looked at me, the wariness in his gaze piercing my heart. Adelina, I know things have been hard, but we're both trying our best. Maybe we just need to give it more time. Time. I echoed, my frustration boiling over. We've been giving it time for years. How much more do we need? Adelina, please, he said, his voice rising. I'm doing everything I can to keep us together, but it's hard when you're so focused on what we don't have. His words stung, and I recoiled as if he had struck me. You think this is my fault? That I'm the reason we're falling apart? He sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. That's not what I meant. I don't know how to help you anymore. His admission hung in the air between us, heavy and painful. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the distance between us growing even more palpable. Days turned into weeks, and Eduardo's absences continued. I tried to busy myself with work and hobbies, anything to distract from the growing emptiness in our home. But the doubt gnawed at me, a constant reminder that something was very wrong. One evening, while Eduardo was out late again, I decided to confront my fears head-on. I called his office, and after a few rings, a woman's voice answered. Anderson & Co., how may I direct your call? Hi, this is Adelina, Eduardo's wife. Is he available? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause before she replied, I'm sorry, Mrs. Anderson, but Eduardo left the office about an hour ago. My heart sank. Did he say where he was going? No, he didn't, she replied, her voice gentle but firm. I thanked her and hung up, the weight of my suspicions crashing down on me. When Eduardo finally came home that night, I was waiting for him. Where were you? I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. He looked taken aback, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. I told you I had to work late. Don't lie to me, Eduardo. I called your office. You left over an hour ago. Where were you? He sighed, his shoulders sagging in defeat. Adelina, it's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, I demanded, my voice breaking. Because right now, it feels like I'm losing you. He took a deep breath, finally meeting my gaze. I've been seeing someone. Her name is Lauren. The admission hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the room spin around me as I struggled to process his words. Why? Was all I could manage to say. Because I felt like I was losing you, he said softly, his eyes filled with regret. Lauren is someone I could talk to, someone who didn't judge me. But she means nothing to me, Adelina. It's you I love. His words were a bitter pill to swallow. The cracks in our marriage had deepened, and I wasn't sure if we could ever repair the damage. But as I looked into Eduardo's eyes, filled with sorrow and remorse, I knew that if we were to have any chance of healing, it would take time, patience, and a lot of hard work. We'll figure it out, I said, echoing his earlier words, one step at a time. Eduardo nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes, one step at a time. And so, we tried to piece our lives back together, one fragile step at a time, even as the fraying edges of our marriage threatened to pull us apart. It wasn't until months later that I discovered the full extent of Eduardo's infidelity. Eduardo had been seeing someone else, Lauren, a woman who offered him the comfort and understanding that I had been too consumed to provide. When I confronted him, he confessed, his eyes filled with guilt and sorrow. One night, as Eduardo and I sat across from each other at the dinner table, I couldn't contain my suspicions any longer. "Eduardo, we need to talk about Lauren," I said, my voice trembling. He froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Slowly, he set it down and looked at me, his face pale. "Adelina, how long has this been going on?" I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "How long have you been seeing her behind my back?" Eduardo's shoulders slumped as he let out a heavy sigh. "A few months. It started when things got really tough between us." I felt a surge of anger and betrayal wash over me. "So, while I was trying to save our marriage, you were with her? What does she have that I don't?" "It's not like that," he said quickly, desperation in his eyes. "Lauren was just an escape. She didn't demand anything from me. She was someone I could talk to, someone who listened." "And I didn't?" I shut back, my voice rising. "I tried to talk to you, Eduardo. I tried to make things better between us." He rubbed his temples, his frustration evident. "I know, Adelina. I know you did, but it was different with her. There was no pressure, no expectations. I was lost, and she helped me feel normal again." "Normal?" I echoed, feeling tears well up in my eyes. "You think this is normal? Sneaking around behind your wife's back?" "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of his confession hanging heavy in the air. I could see the regret in his eyes, the sorrow etched into his features, but it did little to soothe the pain in my heart. "What happens now?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Eduardo reached across the table and took my hand in his. "I want to make things right, Adelina. I want us to heal, but I can't do it alone. I need you with me." His touch, once so comforting, now felt foreign. But despite the hurt and anger, a part of me still loved him, still wanted to fight for our marriage. "We'll figure it out," I said, echoing our earlier promise, "one step at a time." Eduardo nodded, his grip on my hand tightening, one step at a time. For the next few weeks, Eduardo distanced himself from Lauren. He was home more often, and we tried to rebuild the fragile remnants of our relationship. But the shadow of his betrayal lingered, a constant reminder of the trust that had been shattered. One evening, Eduardo came home looking more tired than usual. He sat down next to me on the couch, his expression somber. "I ended things with Lauren today," he said quietly. I looked at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. "How did she take it?" "Not well," he admitted. "She was angry, hurt. She wanted more from me, wanted a future together. But I told her that my future is with you." His words were sincere, but I could still see the pain in his eyes. Did she understand? Eduardo shook his head. "Not really. She threatened to tell you everything if I didn't leave you for her." My heart skipped a beat. "And what did you say?" "I told her that I was choosing you, no matter what, that I was committed to making our marriage work." A mixture of relief and fear washed over me. "Do you think she'll follow through with her threat?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I won't let her come between us anymore, Adelina. I promise you that." In the days that followed, Lauren disappeared from our lives. Eduardo threw himself into our relationship, trying to make up for the time and trust we had lost. But the ghost of Lauren lingered, a silent presence that neither of us could fully escape. One night, as we lay in bed, I turned to Eduardo and asked the question that had been haunting me. "Do you still think about her?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored my own. "Sometimes, but not in the way you think. I think about the mistakes I made, the hurt I caused, and it makes me more determined to be a better husband to you." I nodded, my heart aching with a mix of sorrow and hope. "I want to believe that, Eduardo. I really do." "We'll get there," he said softly, pulling me close, one step at a time. As I lay in his arms, I knew that our journey was far from over. The road to healing would be long and difficult, but as long as we faced it together, there was hope. And for now, that was enough. For months, Eduardo and I drifted through our days, shadows of our former selves. Then, miraculously, I found out I was pregnant. The news should have been a joyous occasion, a beacon of hope in our troubled lives. But the joy was short-lived. In the 5th month, I lost the baby, The pain was indescribable, a wound so deep I wasn't sure it would ever heal. The morning I found out I was pregnant was like a dream. I stood in the bathroom, staring at the positive test, my hands shaking. "Eduardo!" I called out, my voice trembling with excitement. He rushed in, his face a mix of concern and curiosity. "What is it, Adelina?" he asked, his eyes widening as he saw the test in my hand. "We're pregnant," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "We're finally going to have a baby." Eduardo's expression shifted from shock to joy in an instant. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly. "Oh, Adelina, this is wonderful news. I love you so much." "I love you too," I replied, my heart swelling with happiness. The next few months were filled with cautious optimism. We decorated the nursery, bought baby clothes, and attended every prenatal appointment together. Each heartbeat, each ultrasound, was a reminder of the life growing inside me, a symbol of hope for our future. But as the 5th month approached, I began to feel uneasy. Something didn't feel right. One evening, I sat on the couch, my hand resting on my growing belly. Eduardo noticed my silence and sat down beside me. "What's wrong, love?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I don't know," I admitted, tears welling in my eyes. "I just have this terrible feeling that something is wrong." Eduardo took my hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll call the doctor first thing in the morning. But try to stay positive, Adelina. Our baby is strong, just like you." The next day, we went to the doctor's office, my heart pounding with anxiety. The ultrasound technician's face remained impassive as she moved the probe over my belly. Then she frowned and excused herself to fetch the doctor. "Is something wrong?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "Let's wait for the doctor," she replied, her voice calm but unconvincing. When the doctor returned, he performed another ultrasound, his expression growing graver by the minute. "I'm so sorry," he finally said, his voice heavy with sympathy. "There's no heartbeat." The words shattered me. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me, and I was falling into an endless abyss. Eduardo's grip on my hand tightened, but it did little to anchor me. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "This can't be happening. Please no." The doctor placed a hand on my shoulder, his face etched with sorrow. "I wish there was something we could do. But sometimes these things happen for reasons we can't understand." Eduardo and I left the office in silence, the weight of our loss pressing down on us. The drive home was a blur, my mind numb with grief. When we got home, Eduardo tried to comfort me, but I felt utterly inconsolable. As the days turned into weeks, I sank deeper into despair. The emptiness in our home, once filled with hope and anticipation, was now a constant reminder of what we had lost. Eduardo did his best to support me, but I could see the pain in his eyes, the helplessness. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Eduardo broke the silence. "Adelina, we need to talk about this. We can't keep pretending everything is fine." I looked at him, my eyes filled with tears. "What's there to talk about, Eduardo? We lost our baby. I can't have children anymore. What's left to say?" "There's still us," he said softly, reaching out to take my hand. "I love you, Adelina. That hasn't changed. We can find a way through this together." "But how?" I cried, my voice breaking. "How do we move on from this? I feel so broken, Eduardo. I don't know if I can ever be whole again." Eduardo pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly. "We'll take it one day at a time. We'll lean on each other and we'll find our way through this darkness. You don't have to be whole right now. You just have to be here with me." His words were a lifeline, a small glimmer of hope in the midst of my despair. I clung to him, allowing myself to feel the depth of my pain, knowing that he was there to catch me when I fell. The weeks that followed were a slow journey towards healing. We talked more, sharing our fears and our grief. Eduardo stood by me, his unwavering support a testament to his love. I began to see a therapist, and together we started to rebuild our lives, piece by fragile piece. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Eduardo took my hand in his. "Adelina, I know it's been hard, and we've lost so much. But I believe we can still have a family, even if it's not in the way we originally planned." I looked at him, seeing the hope in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "Adoption," he said softly. "There are so many children out there who need loving homes. We could give them that. We could still be parents. The idea took root in my heart, slowly replacing the sorrow with a new sense of purpose. You really think we could do that? I know we can, he replied, his voice filled with conviction. And I believe it could bring us the happiness we've been searching for. I squeezed his hand, a small smile forming on my lips. Then let's do it. Let's adopt and build the family we've always dreamed of. Eduardo smiled, pulling me close. One step at a time, love. We'll get there together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. The road ahead would be challenging, but with Eduardo by my side, I knew we could face anything. Together, we would find our way to happiness, one step at a time. The decision to adopt filled our lives with a new sense of purpose and hope. Eduardo and I threw ourselves into the process, attending meetings, filling out paperwork, and preparing our home for a child. Each step brought us closer to the future we had dreamed of, a future that now included a child who needed us as much as we needed them. Our first visit to the orphanage was a nerve-wracking experience. As we walked through the bright, cheerful hallways filled with children's drawings and toys, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. Eduardo squeezed my hand, his silent support giving me the strength to move forward. We were introduced to Mrs. Martinez, the director of the orphanage, a warm and kind woman who seemed genuinely invested in finding the right homes for the children. Thank you for coming, she said, shaking our hands. We have many wonderful children here who would be so lucky to have a family like yours. Eduardo smiled, his eyes shining with anticipation. We're the lucky ones, Mrs. Martinez. We've been through a lot, but we're ready to open our hearts and our home to a child in need. Mrs. Martinez nodded, her expression softening. I can see that. Let me introduce you to some of the children. I'm sure you'll find the right one for your family. We followed her to a playroom where several children were playing. My heart raced as I scanned the room, wondering which child might become a part of our lives. Then my eyes fell on a little girl sitting quietly in a corner, drawing in a coloring book. She had dark hair and big, soulful eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. That's Elise, Mrs. Martinez said softly. She's been here for almost a year. She's a sweet girl, very smart and creative, but she's had a hard time adjusting after losing her parents. I felt an instant connection to Elise, a sense of empathy and protectiveness. Can we talk to her? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Of course, Mrs. Martinez replied, smiling. Elise dear, come here for a moment. Elise looked up, her eyes widening slightly as she saw us. She put down her coloring book and walked over, her movements tentative. Elise, this is Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, Mrs. Martinez said gently. They would like to get to know you. Hi, Elise, I said, kneeling down to her level. I'm Adelina, and this is Eduardo. We heard you're very good at drawing. Elise nodded, her eyes flickering between us. I like drawing, she said softly. Eduardo crouched down beside me, his smile warm and reassuring. We'd love to see some of your drawings sometime. Maybe you could show us. Elise hesitated for a moment, then nodded again. Okay. As the weeks went by, we spent more time with Elise, visiting the orphanage regularly and slowly building a bond with her. Each visit brought us closer, and it became clear that she was the missing piece of our family. One sunny afternoon, we took Elise to a nearby park. She ran ahead, laughing as she chased after a butterfly. Eduardo and I watched her, our hearts swelling with love and hope. She's amazing, Eduardo said, his eyes never leaving her. I can't believe how lucky we are to have found her. I nodded, tears of happiness welling in my eyes. She's everything we dreamed of, Eduardo. I can't wait to bring her home. Finally, the day came when we could officially adopt Elise. The courtroom was filled with a mix of nervous energy and overwhelming joy. Eduardo held my hand as we stood before the judge, who looked over our paperwork with a kind smile. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, it's clear that you have a deep love for Elise and are committed to providing her with a loving home, the judge said. I'm pleased to finalize this adoption and officially make Elise a part of your family. Elise stood between us, holding our hands tightly. As the judge's gavel came down, signaling the completion of the adoption, tears of joy streamed down my face. Eduardo lifted Elise into his arms, hugging her tightly. "Welcome to the family, Elise," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We're so happy to have you with us." Elise wrapped her arms around his neck, her eyes shining with happiness. "I love you, Mommy and Daddy," she whispered, her voice filled with the purest form of love. As we left the courthouse, a sense of peace and fulfillment settled over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like our lives were complete. Elise had brought a new beginning into our lives, a fresh start filled with love, hope, and endless possibilities. That evening, we celebrated our new family with a special dinner. Eduardo cooked Elise's favorite meal, spaghetti and meatballs, and we sat around the table, laughing and talking like we had always been together. "Elise, would you like to say grace tonight?" Eduardo asked, smiling at her. Elise nodded eagerly, bowing her head. "Thank you, God, for bringing me my new mommy and daddy. Thank you for our home and our love. Amen." "Amen," Eduardo and I echoed, our hearts overflowing with gratitude. As we tucked Elise into bed that night, she looked up at us with sleepy eyes. "Can I have a bedtime story?" she asked. "Of course," I said, sitting beside her and opening a book. Eduardo sat on the other side, his arm around me as we read to her. As Elise drifted off to sleep, I leaned into Eduardo, feeling the warmth of his love and the strength of our family. "We did it," I whispered, my voice filled with awe. "We finally have our family." Eduardo kissed my forehead, his eyes shining with tears. "Yes, we did, and I couldn't be happier." As I looked at Elise, peacefully sleeping, I knew that our journey had been worth every moment of pain and struggle. We had found our way through the darkness, and now with Elise, we had a new beginning, one filled with love, joy, and the promise of a beautiful future together. 3 years passed, and our life with Elise was filled with joy and the everyday adventures of parenthood. She had become the heart of our family, bringing light and laughter to our home. Eduardo and I had worked hard to build a stable, loving environment for her, but the ghosts of our past lingered, casting shadows over our happiness. On the morning of my birthday, I awoke to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of laughter from the kitchen. Eduardo and Elise were making breakfast, their voices mingling in a harmony that made my heart swell. "Good morning, birthday girl," Eduardo called out as I walked in, his eyes sparkling with love. Elise ran over, her face beaming with excitement. "Happy birthday, Mommy. Look, we made pancakes." I scooped her up in my arms, kissing her cheek. "Thank you, sweetheart. They look delicious." Eduardo wrapped his arms around us, kissing my forehead. "Happy birthday, Adelina. We have a special day planned for you." I smiled, my heart full. "I can't wait." After breakfast, Eduardo and Elise presented me with a beautifully wrapped gift. "Open it, Mommy," Elise urged, her eyes wide with anticipation. I carefully unwrapped the gift, revealing a pair of stunning sapphire earrings. They were elegant and exquisite, a perfect match for the heart of the ocean pendant that Lauren had once given Eduardo. My breath caught in my throat as memories of Lauren and that painful time flooded back. Eduardo must have noticed the change in my expression because he gently took my hand. "Adelina, I know these remind you of a difficult time," he said softly, "but I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that symbolizes how far we've come and the strength of our love." I looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity and love there. "Thank you, Eduardo. They're beautiful. I love them." As the day went on, we enjoyed the simple pleasures of being together as a family. Eduardo and Elise had planned a picnic in the park, complete with all my favorite foods. We played games, laughed, and basked in the warmth of the sun and each other's company. Later that evening, as we sat around the dinner table, the doorbell rang. Eduardo exchanged a puzzled look with me before getting up to answer it. I heard muffled voices and then Eduardo's footsteps returning, slower this time. He walked into the dining room, holding a small package. "This just arrived for you," he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I took the package, my curiosity piqued. It was wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. I carefully opened it, revealing a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, simple yet elegant, with a note tucked beneath it. My hands trembled as I unfolded the note. "Adelina, I never meant to cause you pain. I hope this gift brings you some measure of peace. Lauren." The room seemed to grow colder, the air heavy with the weight of the past. Eduardo's face paled as he read the note over my shoulder. "Adelina, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice strained. "I had no idea she would reach out to you." I shook my head, trying to steady my emotions. "It's okay, Eduardo. It's just unexpected." Elise looked up at us, sensing the tension. "Mommy, who is Lauren?" I forced a smile, not wanting to burden her with our past. "Just an old friend, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." Eduardo and I spent the rest of the evening in a tense silence, the shadows of our past creeping back into the corners of our minds. After putting Elise to bed, we sat together on the couch, the bracelet and note lying between us like a barrier. "Why now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why would she send this after all these years?" Eduardo sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe she's trying to make amends. Maybe she feels guilty for what happened." "Do you still have feelings for her?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, my insecurities bubbling to the surface. Eduardo's eyes widened with shock. "Adelina, no. I haven't seen or spoken to Lauren since I ended things with her. You're the only one I love, the only one I've ever loved." I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. "It's just hard. Seeing her name, being reminded of that time. It brings back all the pain and uncertainty." He took my hands in his grip firm and reassuring. "I know, and I'm sorry. I wish I could erase that part of our past. But all I can do is promise you that I'm here, with you and Elise, and that's all that matters to me." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our past pressing down on us. But as I looked into Eduardo's eyes, I saw the love and commitment that had carried us through so many trials. We had faced our demons before, and we could do it again. "Let's move forward," I said finally, my voice steady. "Let's focus on the present and the future and leave the past where it belongs." Eduardo nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "Agreed. We'll get through this together, just like we always have." As we embraced, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The ghosts of our past might never fully disappear, but we had the strength and love to face them together. And with Elise by our side, we had everything we needed to build a bright and happy future. 3 more years passed, each day weaving a stronger bond among us. Elise grew into a bright, joyful girl, her laughter filling our home with a warmth that healed old wounds. Eduardo and I found our rhythm again, our love deepening with every challenge we overcame. Our past had tested us, but it had also fortified us, proving that our love could endure anything. It was the morning of Elise's 10th birthday, and the house was abuzz with excitement. Eduardo and I had planned a surprise party for her, inviting all her friends and decorating the backyard with colorful streamers and balloons. As the sun rose, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, we finished setting up, eager to see the look on Elise's face. "Do you think she'll like it?" Eduardo asked, adjusting a banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Elise." I smiled, my heart swelling with affection for him. "She'll love it. You've done an amazing job." He turned to me, his eyes softening. "We did this together, Adelina, just like everything else." I kissed him lightly, a gesture filled with gratitude and love. "Thank you for always being my rock." "Always," he replied, squeezing my hand. "Now let's go wake up our birthday girl." We tiptoed into Elise's room, where she lay sound asleep, her dark hair fanned out on her pillow. Eduardo and I exchanged a smile before gently shaking her awake. "Good morning, birthday girl," we sang in unison. Elise stirred, her eyes fluttering open. A wide smile spread across her face as she remembered the special day. "Is it time for my party?" she asked, her excitement palpable. "Almost," Eduardo said, lifting her out of bed. "But first, you need to get ready. We have a big surprise for you." Elise's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "What is it?" "You'll see," I said, winking at her. "But you have to promise not to peek until we say so." She nodded eagerly, bouncing on her toes. "I promise." After helping her get dressed in her favorite outfit, a blue dress with white polka dots, we led her to the backyard, her eyes covered with Eduardo's hands. "Ready?" he asked, glancing at me. "Ready," I confirmed, my heart pounding with excitement. Eduardo removed his hands, and Elise gasped in delight as she took in the sight of the decorated yard and her friends waiting to surprise her. "Happy birthday, Elise." Everyone shouted, their voices blending into a joyful chorus. Elisa's eyes filled with tears of happiness as she turned to us. "Thank you, Mommy. Thank you, Daddy. This is the best birthday ever." As the party unfolded, I watched Eduardo and Elise play together, their laughter mingling with the music and chatter of the guests. I felt a profound sense of contentment, knowing that we had built a beautiful life despite the hardships we had faced. Later that evening, after the party had ended and Elise was sound asleep, Eduardo and I sat together on the porch, the stars twinkling above us. The cool night air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the distant hum of crickets. "Today was perfect," Eduardo said, his voice soft. Elise was so happy. "She was," I agreed, leaning my head on his shoulder. "I think this was the happiest I've ever seen her." Eduardo wrapped his arm around me, pulling me closer. "We did good, Adelina. We created a beautiful life for her." "And for us," I added, looking up at him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Eduardo." He tilted my chin up, his gaze intense and filled with love. "We've both had our moments of weakness and strength, but we've always faced them together. That's what makes us strong." I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. "I know we've had our struggles, but through it all, you've been my constant. I love you more every day." Eduardo kissed me, a tender, lingering kiss that spoke of all the love and devotion we shared. "I love you too, Adelina, more than words can ever express." As we sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, I realized that our love had not only survived the trials of our past, but had been strengthened by them. The ghosts of our past were still there, but they no longer haunted us. Instead, they served as reminders of how far we had come and how deeply we loved each other. In the quiet of the night, with the stars as our witnesses, I knew that no matter what the future held, we would face it together. Our love had proven its strength time and time again, and with Elise by our side, we had everything we needed to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "To the future," Eduardo whispered, raising an imaginary glass. "To the future," I echoed, feeling a surge of hope and joy. As we looked out into the night, the world seemed full of endless possibilities. Our journey had been difficult, but it had led us to this moment, a moment of pure, unadulterated happiness. And in that moment, I knew that the strength of our love would carry us through anything. The past had shaped us, but it was our love that defined us. And as we sat there, dreaming of the future, I knew that our love story was far from over. It was just beginning.